A Bajan harvesting honey is my story was framed and captured in publication 279 and ventilated in podcast 147 in ISBN 978 976 968 2481. According to Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, I quote, recent estimates suggest that there are at least 2 trillion bees in the world which are being taken care of by beekeepers, and honeybees have been in crisis since 2006, when beekeepers first reported the sudden disappearances of entire colonies. End quote. Despite this alarming trend, I will juxtapose my proffer, a Bajan harvesting honey, against all of the data that I will glean from the research coupled together with my lens to capture and frame explicit details of evidence which imputes a Bajan harvesting honey. A Bajan harvesting honey is predicated on the fact that the bees will build their combs on honey stored in the upper parts of the hives. For instance, in one jurisdiction, bee colony contains approximately 30,000 bees and can produce between 120 and 200 pounds of honey each year, leaving an average of 80 pounds of surplus honey annually. In another foraging, bees collect flower nectar using the bee's long tube-shaped tongue and store the honey in their extra stomach called a crop. Bees play a big role in agriculture. They pollinate crops, increase yields, and give rise to a lucrative honey industry. Bees are so important, in fact, that millions are spent renting hives to pollinate farmers' crops. Honeybees produce commodities such as honey, beeswax, pollen, propolis, and royal jelly. Plausibly, if and when we are desirous of becoming a beekeeper, we must be au fait with the fact that some beekeepers also raise queens and other bees to sell to other farmers and to satisfy scientific curiosity. Beekeepers also use honeybees to provide pollination services to fruit and vegetables growers. Many people keep bees as a hobby. Others do it for income, either as a sideline to other work or as a commercial operator. These factors affect the number of colonies maintained by the beekeeper. According to Wikipedia.org, bees are an integral component of the natural environment, but in some instances we take them for granted. Maybe it's because we don't realize how important they really are. Succinctly put, bees pollinate our plants, which mean they carry pollen between plants of different sexes to fertilize them, or even between different parts of the same plant, which help plants reproduce. Bees even help plants survive by preventing inbreeding, according to environmentalscience.org. Historically speaking, honey has been called the nectar of the gods because of its rich history and contribution to food. It has been consumed for more than 8,000 years, as evidenced by a Mesolithic rock painting showed 2 honey hunters collecting honey and honeycomb from a bee nest. StudyAndScore.com, I quote, "For thousands of years, the only foolproof method of gathering honey was to find a wild hive. the locations of which were fiercely guarded. The earliest apiaries made hives from old logs or tree trunks to mimic the homes of wild swarms. In the modern method of apiculture, the honeybees are reared in movable artificial hives. This was designed and invented by Longstreth in 1951. This invention has turned apiculture into a cottage industry and has provided employment to lakhs of people, may be perceived differently. However, in this environment, over the years, language, evidences, and understanding are not the only reasons for differences in opinions, but differences can only stem from misunderstandings or making a personal choice. There are always other views. According to u2rujj.org, opinions also vary about how long honeybees have been around on the planet. Some sources state about 40 million years. Others claim there are fossilized remains of honeybees dating back 150 million years. On the other hand, according to thoughtco.com, I quote, "The earliest records of humans eating honey are believed to date back 10,000 years. This has been indicated in prehistoric drawings found in caves, whilst drawings found in Spain and believed to be around 7,000 years old appear to indicate a form of beekeeping, according to thoughtco.com. In the scheme of things, as a Barbadian, I sense that according to hmbbarbados.info, I quote, "It is the formal and official name for citizens of the Caribbean island of Barbados. But the term Barbadian is only used to fill out official documents and in passports. Business people should also use the term Barbadian in lectures and presentations. Likewise, in Barbados, the term Bajan is used by the majority of people in everyday life. Among themselves, the residents of Barbados call each other actually always Bajans. Even radio and TV stations mainly use the term Bajan. The same applies to many newspapers and online media." End quote. Similarly, according to WikiDiff, I quote, "A bee is a flying insect of the superfamily Apodiae, known for its organized societies and for collecting pollen and producing wax and honey. However, it should be noted that in this context, the said bee will not be a contest, especially for spelling. On the other hand, what I can state emphatically, apiculture is the keeping and maintenance of bees for commercial reasons." End quote. Now that this conversation has established context, ignited my intellectual passion, and provided me with license to set the theoretical platform to contextualize and focus the curiosity lens, I now have a strong desire to know and learn something about a Bajan harvesting honey, and a bee and an apiculture which is not a myth. In this ambience, according to beepods.com, I quote, "There is one beekeeping myth we hear a lot, is that you need to have acres of farmland property to start a beehive. The truth is, you can set up a beehive just about anywhere." End quote. As long as you can create a level foundation, have access to sunlight, and are within several miles of quality forage, you can have bees. The more that I trek along this research journey, my cognitive and cognition has convinced me that a Bajan harvesting honey can be characterized as a beekeeper, honey farmers, apiarists, or less commonly apiculturists. The term beekeeper refers to persons who keeps honeybees in beehives, boxes, or other receptacles. The beekeeper does not control the creatures, but owns the hives or boxes and associated equipment. The bees are free to forage or leave as they desire. Bees usually return to the beekeeper's hive as the hive presents a clean, dark, sheltered home, a view espoused by Wikipedia.org. All things considered, a Bajan harvesting honey must utilize the most efficient and safe ways to complete this task. For example, the uses of a bee vacuum. The vacuum has a long hose used to suck the bees out of the area, which dumps them into a container about the size of a 5-gallon paint bucket. A smoker calms bees and reduces stinging. Wooden frames hold sheets of beeswax or plastic foundation that are imprinted with the shapes of hexagonal cells. Moreover, not to mention the fume board that is placed above the honey supers after you spray its cloth insert with a bee repellent like Bee Go or Bee Quick. The bees hate the smell of the repellent and will retreat within a few moments into the brood chambers, leaving the supers bee-free and ready to harvest. Consequently, I must confess that there are 3 main tools for harvesting honey: a bee brush, an escape board, or a fume board. All things considered, a Bajan harvesting honey must utilize the most efficient and safe ways to complete this task. Use a bee brush to simply brush the bees out of the way when harvesting honey. An escape board is a door you place on the hive between the supers and the brood chamber. Its design allows bees to exit the super but does not allow them back in. This clears all the bees out of the hive in about 24 hours. Veil and gloves protect the head and arms from stings. After they gain experience, many beekeepers prefer to work without gloves. The more that I flesh out this purported theory, a Bajan engaging in harvesting honey, the evidence indicate that this way of life requires a committed process and a procedure which involves pulling a frame from the hive and use a hot knife to cut away the wax. In some jurisdictions, they may keep the wax to make candles. This activity, according to wonderpolis.org, is followed by the process which involves a honey extractor. This is a device that takes the liquid honey out of a honeycomb without destroying the frame. These wooden frames hold sheets of beeswax or plastic foundation that are imprinted with the shapes of a hexagonal cells. In closing, now that I have ventilated this topic, I must confess that although I am not a linguist, neither an authority on apiculture, but an author, cinematographer, media art specialist, licensed cultural practitioner, podcaster, and publisher with a passion for education and research. I have juxtaposed my proffer against all of the data gleaned from the research, coupled together with the explicit details captured and framed with the assistance of my lens. I wish to state that it appears to impute a Bajan harvesting honey. This conversation ignited my intellectual passion and enlightened me to the various approaches adopted by a Bajan harvesting honey, which is in sync with the way of life of the Egyptians, who were also practicing a form of beekeeping around 2,400 to 2,600 years ago during the time of the Old Kingdom. By then, the power of fire and smoke was known, and the Nushira's Sun Temple. Beekeepers were depicted blowing smoke into hives as they removed the honeycombs. The honey would then be stored in earthenware jars. This view is espoused by thoughtco.com set. Now that the proverbial dust is settled, and I had a strong desire to know and learn something about bees and of Bajan harvesting honey, is my story, which was captured and framed in publication 279 and ventilated in podcast 147 in ISBN 978 976 968 2481.